Hello again, and welcome to the Gaming News Canada show presented by GBG PLC. I'm your host, Steve McAllister. Next week will mark the third anniversary of regulated sports betting and online gaming in Ontario. Since launching the legal industry on April 4th, 2021, more than 50 operators have set up shop with only a few departures, most recently UK-based Fitzdarris. Today, there are 50 operators in the province looking after more than 80 gaming websites. To help us look back at the past 36 months and also to what's ahead in the Ontario and Canadian gaming landscape, we will be joined by Bet99 head honcho Jared Beber, TRM Public Affairs President Troy Ross, and industry expert and frequent guest on this podcast, Amanda Brewer. We really wanted to have on this podcast representatives from the provincial government and the bodies responsible for regulating and conducting and managing Ontario's iGaming business. However, our request to the office of Doug Downey, the Attorney General of Ontario, at the time we recorded this episode was turned down. And we continue our efforts to have Martha Otten, the departing Executive Director of iGaming Ontario, and Dr. Karen Schnarrt, the President and Registrar of the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, be our guests. But on with this show. Joining us now on the Gaming News Canada show is the President and Chief Bottle Washer of TRM Public Affairs, Troy Ross. Hey, Troy, great to have you back on the podcast. I want to start by saying I really wanted to have you on this episode because you've been hip deep in the iGaming world for more than 2 decades now, especially here in Ontario, including your time with the Alcohol and Gaming Commission and the government of Ontario, now in your role representing operators and other companies in the gaming space. You know, as this Ontario market turns 3 years old next week, what has stood out to you when you reflect on the first 3 years?
First, sometimes it feels like it's been a lot longer than three years, Steve. As you said, I've been trying to kick down the doors of governments and agencies and regulators on this file for over 20 years. So it seems like it's been a lot longer than 3 years, and so much has happened in the past 3 years that it just seems like it's been so much longer. I think the things that stick out for me, and while the numbers are not public yet, or I'm calculating some estimates based on the first 3 quarters of year 3, the results speak for themselves, right? It looks like we're going to have wagering up from 63 billion last year to about 75 billion, 2.4 in GGR last year to looks like it's going to be 2.9, almost 3 billion this year. And that translates to about $600 million in net new taxes to the province of Ontario. So that's a pretty significant number. Nobody estimated that we would be seeing those kinds of revenues when we first started this discussion. I think the other thing that is really interesting is the channelization rate that Ontario has been able to hit very quickly is knocking on 90%. I'd be very surprised if the results from year 3 were much less or just under 90%, which puts Ontario in a competitive stance with the global leaders like the United Kingdom, Denmark, and Italy, the only ones that are over 90% that I'm aware of. So by any metric, that's a huge success. And I think when you factor in the results of the Deloitte study with the positive economic impacts that has had on employment, on GDP contribution, and on other economic spinoffs, the results are frankly better than any of us predicted. So job well done to the Ontario government, the AGCO, and to IGO.
Hey, Troy, the one thing that we've, over the past 3 or 4 weeks, we've talked to people on the podcast and also with the newsletter. And when this market opened, and almost from day one, there was talk around consolidation and what the small fish were going to get swallowed up by the big players. And yet, as you and I sit here recording this interview, there's still, I think, 51 legal operators in Ontario. I think we've had 2, maybe 3 operators have bailed on the province since the regulated marketplace opened in April 2022. Do you have any explanation for that?
I go back to, I think that the marketplace has performed even better than any of us would have expected. The reality, I think, Steve, is this is a credit to the decision makers at the Ontario government, to the AGCO, and to the folks at iGo for creating a commercially attractive, reasonable regulatory regime. There's always going to be people that enter into a market and for whatever reason underclub the expectations and stub their toe and have to pull out. But the overall wagering keeps going up. The number of operators in the space has remained constant or slightly up. So again, it's a credit to the policymakers in government for getting that mix right, and introducing fair and reasonable taxation, but not maybe overburdening the operators, and chasing them out of the marketplace.
And are those thoughts, Troy, are those echoed in your conversations? I mean, you work on behalf of several operators. Are you, those comments you just made, are they kind of echoed by the people that you're dealing with?
I think so, largely. Listen, are there some lessons learned over the past 3 years that could be applied here? Certainly. I think if you go back to the original intent of regulating this marketplace, and you look at the Brigitte Sand report, which set the foundation and the objectives for the model, those objectives were consumer choice, consumer protection, reduced red tape, and legal market growth. Hard to argue that you don't have wins across every column there, Steve. And while I think the bulk of operators would say huge successes and wins, I think everyone would agree there are some lessons to be learned and some potential areas for improvement. And many of those are already being addressed, right? iGaming Ontario is already moving down a path towards a planned centralized self-exclusion responsible gaming platform. That's going to be the gold standard for self-exclusion globally. I think there's a recognition that there's a need for some automation of some of the other procedures. And I expect those are on the agenda as well for the coming year, including automating AML processes, because that would help reduce the cost of compliance. And the current manual process can be quite labor intensive. There's probably some room for, I think, a bit of an enforcement actions against clearly black market operators and against their supply chain, which I think would help drive the Ontario channelization rate even higher. And I think finally, maintaining the commercially attractive policies that drew operators to Ontario in the first place is going to be critical.
Hey, Troy, as we record this podcast on March 11th, iGaming Ontario still hasn't found a successor for Martha Otten. That's expected to not happen, and or else iGo will hit that 3-year anniversary not having a new leader in place. When that person does come into quote power, what do you see as what would be the number one priority? What would be kind of 1, 2, 3 on their list of things to do right away?
I won't be that person, so I'm not sure that I would want to presume what they should do. I think that there are a series of let's back up. Ontario is the first jurisdiction in Canada to do this. This is literally revolutionary across the country. By and large, most of the things that the Ontario government did, whether those were government policies, regulatory standards, or IGO policies, generally, this has been considered a huge success, even compared to all the other jurisdictions in the world that have been doing this a lot longer than we have. I think automating some of the current manual processes would really help a number of operators minimize some of their costs. I think there are some fixes on the AML front, which I understand are not simple because they require some adjustments with FinTrack. But I have to think those would be some of the priorities that the new leadership at iGaming Ontario would focus on.
Troy, what does need to be addressed by the AGCO and IGO over the next 3 years?
I think Steve, if you go back to the original intent of creating the regulatory regime, and you look at that initial Brigitte Sand report that set the foundations and the objectives for regulating the market, those objectives were consumer choice, consumer protection, reduced red tape, and legal market growth. And scoring against that criteria, we have wins across every column. And while this has been a huge success, I think everyone would agree that there are some lessons learned and potentially some areas for improvement. From the iGaming Ontario perspective, I think they're already moving down a path to create that planned centralized self-exclusion for responsible gaming, which will set the standard for responsible gaming self-exclusion. I think the automation of some of the other manual procedures that are now in place, reporting to IGO, I expect those will be on the agenda as well, including hopefully some improvements to the AML processes. And the objective there is to reduce the cost of compliance because the current manual processes are actually quite labor intensive. I think finally, if I could wave my magic wand and see some other changes in the environment, I would hope for some enforcement of what are the clearly black market operators and their supply chain. And the net result of that hopefully would be it would drive the Ontario channelization rate even higher. Finally, I guess I would say that maintaining the commercially attractive policies that Ontario developed and that drew the operators here in the first place will be critical.
Hey Troy, you mentioned earlier those operators and why they were attracted to the market here in Ontario. When we know many of those operators, some of whom you represent, they would like to see the Ontario model or some facsimile taken to other provinces across the country. I guess my final question for you is, why hasn't that happened? And I guess the two-parter, because I should get your thoughts in Alberta, because that's what everybody talks about these days when they talk about regulated gambling in Canada. But why hasn't another province followed Ontario's lead by now?
Well, I think to your point, Steve, Alberta is following Ontario's lead. And while I think it's premature to go into any details, there are a number of other provinces that are exploring regulation of internet gaming as well. Early stages, but people are kicking the tires. The complicated question, and there's probably a variety of reasons. The reality is governments do not embrace change quickly, particularly when that change involves dealing with controversial issues like gambling policy. And governments and their agencies are really structured to maintain the status quo. When they do relent and agree to introduce change, it can be painfully slow. But the truth is, it's not the provincial governments that are resistant to exploring regulation. It's really the incumbent operators, and by that I mean the lottery corporations. They have taken the unusual step of creating a lobbying entity, spending significant amounts of money to unfortunately try to discredit the successful Ontario regime. And given the record of success, it's a puzzling move, particularly when you consider the spend at Play OLG at the Ontario Lottery Corporation site is up. The spend on their land-based casinos in Ontario is up, all since the introduction of the regulatory regime. So there's been zero cannibalization. And regulated models offer far superior player protection, responsible gaming than a monopoly alone. They do that because they have much higher channelization rate. And the higher the channelization rate, that means more consumers are enjoying the benefits of a well-regulated market with world-class regulatory, world-class responsible gaming standards and consumer protection measures. So there's a growing body of evidence in Ontario. Hopefully we will have a growing body of evidence in Alberta soon. And I think that will begin to change the dynamic, because the revenue numbers coming out of Ontario for year 3, I think it's clear, Steve, that those are going to continue to create political and financial pressure to explore regulation in the rest of the country.
That is Troy Ross, the president of TRM Public Affairs. Troy, always grateful for your insight and for spending the time with me here on the Gaming News Canada show.
It was a pleasure, Steve.
Talk to you again soon. We welcome back for the first time in many, many, many moons, the co-founder and CEO of Bet99's parent company, the Interactive Entertainment Group, the one and only Jared Beber. Hey, Jared, great to see you again.
Thanks for having me, Steve. It's great to see you again.
Hey, Jared, I want to start just quickly before we talk about the 3-year anniversary of Ontario. Bet99 was quite involved with the Four Nations Cup last month. I think for anybody who's a hockey fan, just an incredible tournament. But I was wondering if you just speak a little bit about Bet99's involvement and your thoughts on the activation and the tournament itself.
Yeah, I mean, the tournament was a massive success. To your point, I'm still buzzing about it. I think most of Canada is still buzzing about it. You couldn't write a better story. Obviously, it's unfortunate, some of the uncertainty that's happening in regards to some of the macro situation regarding US and Canada, but it's still our sport. It was an amazing first game between US and Canada. It was an amazing showcasing of talent across the board. I think this format, unlike what we've seen with the NBA, their All-Star break, it wasn't nearly as big a success in terms of the engagement, but the Four Nations experience was fantastic. And I mean, it was the numbers speak for themselves in terms of the impressions and the engagement across the board. And I also think it opened up, to a much larger demographic who may have not been interested in hockey before, but the camaraderie of being attached to your team, to your country, it drove a level of engagement that hadn't been seen before. So it was a great tournament, and it was very, very fun to watch.
It feels like for 992, Jared, just your ties to Montreal, that everything was kind of right in your wheelhouse, right?
100%. I mean, for us, our approach with Interactive Entertainment Group has been to build much more of a cohesive entertainment ecosystem, right? For us, this is not just simply about gambling. This is about entertainment. So whether you're attending one of the events at 99 Entertainment, whether you're consuming some of our content with 99 Media, or whether you are actively gambling in Ontario under Bet99, we are a one-stop shop for all things entertainment. And when it came to Four Nations, this was an opportunity for us to, of course, engage through the broadcast, activations in the periphery, and even most exciting with 99 Entertainment to host the official party where it had nothing to do with gambling. You know, it was an opportunity for sports fans and the community to engage and have some fun and celebrate the amazing tournament that was happening. So it was a massive success, you know, across the board, but definitely for Bet99 and the visibility, it was a fantastic turnout all around.
Hey, Jared, we wanted to have you on this episode of the podcast because of the 3 years. And obviously, you know, Bet99 has been heavily invested in Ontario. And I think, you know, your company in particular, you've been there through all the ebbs and flows of the market here. You know, the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario changing some rules around marketing and advertising. I think about just a little over a year ago now. You know, at the beginning, you guys had Austin Matthews on board as an ambassador. George St. Pierre was around and is still around doing some responsible gambling messaging now. And I think the other piece too, a lot of us that were new to covering this industry, we focused a lot on sports betting in the early days of the market here in Ontario, and then saw pretty quickly as iGaming Ontario started releasing its market performance reports how prevalent online casino was with customers in the province. I just wonder, from your standpoint, what would be the highlights, or what has stood out most to you and the people you work with at Bet99 as we look back on 3 years here?
I mean, listen, to your point, the numbers speak for themselves. It's absolutely a casino market. You know, at the end of the day, sports is fantastic. Sports can be a fantastic acquisition tool. But true profitability, of course, is driven on the casino side of things. And kudos, of course, to AGCO and IGO for rolling out a framework that allowed for both sports and casino. You know, but at the end of the day, sports is cyclical in nature and seasonal, right? You've got your core sports seasons, you've got your marquee events, but at the end of the day, casino is 365. You know, it's available at all times. So to your point, definitely a casino market. I think, you know, in this competitive market, the core of what players want is quite uniform. You know, they want control and customization, right? People want the ability, for speaking sports, they want the ability to create their own bets. They want to personalize their gaming experience, right? They want a good and intuitive UX, right? Is it fast? Is it frictionless if possible? And they want trust and transparency, right? Is there responsible gaming first? Can you get your funds on and off? You know, is KYC prioritized? All of these items, that's the core of it, right? But ultimately, and I mean, I think what we have focused on and what really sets Bet99 apart here is that we have focused, as I mentioned before, on entertainment beyond betting, right? Creating a level of both and digital engagement that comes together in a seamless experience, right? The personalization piece I'll really highlight. You know, personalization it's an investment that pays off exponentially over time. And so to really be able to understand your players at scale and tailor their experiences to what you are seeing, all rooted in localization that really matters, this is really important. And last but not least, I'd say as well, you know, that community-driven engagement, right? People want to feel like they are a part of something. And by generating that community-driven vitality, I mean, by creating raving fans, by ultimately fostering kind of a two-way storytelling experience and this social collaboration, it goes a long way, and it shows that it's a brand that cares and is sensitive, you know, to the communities and players that they service. So that is very much so, you know, what we have focused on, and I think what really Canadian players in Ontario markets in particular are feeling and appreciating.
Hey, Jared, is there something you've seen from your customers that surprise you, whether it's, you know, a certain kinds of games they like to play, or people, you know, all over traditional online casino games like blackjack, for example? Like, is there something that really surprised you as we kind of look over the past 3 years in Ontario?
It's a great question, and it's not a one size fits all. You know, of course, blackjack is quite dominant. Of course, you know, NBA, NFL, you know, are carrying the bulk of the volume on all things sports. But, you know, what's always surprised me is some of the more niche sports, you know, the table tennis, for example, some of the novelty bets that are available, the engagement that we see with those opportunities are fantastic. And I mean, from a casino standpoint, there are very fundamental nuances between, what someone in the downtown Toronto core versus someone in Sault Ste. Marie versus Sudbury might actually appreciate and want to engage with. So it's not a one size fits all approach. And that's why that personalization and being able to tailor the experience to those to those preferences is so critical.
Hey, Jared, we tend on this show. I mean, we do have operators like yourself on the show. We tend to talk to a lot of, startups and regulators, and of course, Paul Burns from the Canadian Gaming Association. And, while I have you here, the responsible gambling issue is one that this industry continues to catch flack around responsible gambling. And I think it's kind of tossed around like nickels. And I'm trying to remember, we had someone on the podcast not too long ago and talked about the fact that there is a lot of due diligence around responsible gambling if you're a customer of a sports book and an online casino operator like Bet99. Can you just address that a little bit? Because I think it goes beyond the marketing campaigns. We're recording this interview during Problem Gambling Awareness Month in the U.S. And there are a lot of organizations out there who are heavily invested in responsible gambling. But from purely an operator standpoint, what are the things that you're most proud of with that RG component?
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, it's not a buzzword, is what I will say, and say very clearly. We at Bet99 at least are very active in showcasing we are built by Canadians for Canadians. And we can't say that we serve the Canadian people if we don't care about the longevity of the industry. And that means responsible gaming at the forefront. We do not want to extract value or have players playing outside of their means. That's not in the industry's best interest nor the company's best interest. And so what I'm most proud of is the team and the culture that's been implemented, because from the top to the bottom, this is at the forefront, right? It's not just a campaign. It's not just allocating a certain amount of spend towards it. There's a level of ambiguity in identification of RG concerns. Of course, there is the framework. Of course, there is the training, but there's also an art in being proactive and identifying it through the relationships that we're building. I mean, going back to personalization that matters and building relationships and driving engagement. Through that engagement, how can we be more proactive to identify where might there be issues, and how can we effectively intervene to ensure that, again, we put the player before the company. And as a result, the player becomes a raving fan, and they'll support the company because we're offering an entertainment service, but RG has to come at the forefront. So the culture that is embedded within the organization, from the marketing to the intervention, to the ongoing training, to the reporting, that's really what I'm extremely proud about with the team and with the company. And frankly, I see that, quite uniform across the industry. Everyone is very much so taking this seriously. And kudos to the regulators for focusing on this from the onset. And everyone is taking it to heart, and it's very much so a priority.
You mentioned the team, Jordan. I just wonder how your team has evolved over the 3 years in terms of growth, and are there certain sectors of the company where you've invested more resources over time?
We're growing, and that's a great problem to have across the entire board. For us as a company, we're remote. Everyone is remote, and so building a culture. This business is born in COVID, and there are some individuals in the organization who have ever met, but it's really special, the culture that's been created, because we can sit behind our screens, but people genuinely care, and people have come together with a variety of different perspectives, but with the uniform goal of offering the best entertainment experience in Ontario. And it's been fantastic to see. So team has grown across the board. I mean, if there was one area I'd specifically highlight, it's we deal with a lot of data. And I keep hammering in on personalization, but data is useless if you can't ultimately clean it, extract value from it, derive insights from it, and act on it. And so, building out all things on the data side of things has definitely been a priority for us.
Hey, Jared, two more questions. I just wondered, you mentioned earlier the relationship with the AGCO and iGaming Ontario. I just, how do you see that relationship continue to evolve? And I think if you talk to a lot of people in the gambling industry, not just in Ontario, but across the country and in the US and internationally, there's a feeling out there that Ontario pretty much got this right at the beginning. I think everybody will admit that there's still some tweaks that can be made, but are there a couple of things that you would like to see addressed or conversations you've had on things that could have those tweaks done moving forward?
Yeah. I mean, first things first, I do want to acknowledge both the AGCO and IGO, because it has not been an easy task to be the pioneers of what they have put together, and balancing, those compliance requirements, but also the realities of being competitive in this market and driving the level of channelization that they have. It's not an easy task, but they've done a fantastic job. So I will absolutely give kudos where kudos is due. And what I'll say is, as we continue to move forward, having the level of open dialogue, which we do have with the regulators, and I'm sure many of our competitors do as well, where we can challenge each other to get better, is a positive. We are at least at Bet99 very much so a strong advocate for any sort of regulatory efficiencies and modernization that we can implement. Whether that's on the further usage of AI for risk monitoring, whether it's enhancements to the reporting side of things, whether it's on the AML side of things. There is a lot that we can do. And as long as we can keep the lines of communication open and share that feedback, I have no doubt that we'll continue to make material improvements year after year.
A final question, and again, I'm sure you, like the rest of us, were watching Alberta and kind of Alberta's on the clock, and just your thoughts in Alberta and across the rest of the country, because I believe Bet99 is still a member of the Quebec Online Gaming Coalition, and I guess is it in a perfect world, would you like to see every province across the country adopt some facsimile of the Ontario model? What is it that you and the rest of the folks at Bet99 are looking for?
Absolutely. I mean, a fully regulated Canadian market is 100% what we want. I mean, I'll start with Alberta. There's a lot of speculation. I mean, again, kudos to the team and the government in Alberta for progressing the dialogue. We've had dialogue with Minister Nally and his team, for example, and they're taking feedback. And they want to ensure that they not only implement a model that is aligned with Ontario, because a lot of the heavy lifting has been done, but they can implement further improvements and tweaks and do it correctly. So it seems I won't speculate on the timeline of it, but it seems like it's a matter of when, not if, which is fantastic. In regards to the other provinces, I always go back to the why. Every province might have a different why. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, right? Is it channelization? Is it consumer protection? Is it RG focused? Is it to maximize taxation revenue for the province? Is it to drive investment? Is it marketing implication? Whatever the why is, the path with regulation addresses it, right? You've got operators, international operators who are currently operating in the rest of Canada, and all of them are sitting there and saying, tell us what you would like, and we will fall in line. And I think that's a great starting point for the dialogue. And I'm hopeful that one by one, the provinces follow suit and recognize that whatever their why is, regulation is the path to satisfy it.
Jared Beber is the co-founder and CEO of the Interactive Entertainment Group. Hey, Jared, always great to catch up with you. Look forward to running into each other at the Canadian Gaming Summit in June. And thanks so much for joining us on the Gaming News Canada show.
Thanks for having me, Steve. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks, Jared. Hey, gaming news guys. Are you ready to win a bigger share of Canada's rapidly expanding gaming market? Then GBG are ready to help. As the global leaders in identity verification, GBG partner with over 60% of iGaming Ontario brands to help them onboard more players, maximize match rates, and deliver FinTrack compliance. Visit gbgplc.com today and talk to the trust experts. We welcome back to the podcast gaming industry veteran and frequent flyer to the Gaming News Canada show, Amanda Brewer. Hey, Amanda, thanks so much for doing this. I guess we'll call it an anniversary special of the podcast.
It's great to be back. Thank you very much, Steve, in these dying days of winter.
Hey, Amanda, you and I have talked about this market pretty much from the first day we met, or we're on Zoom or whatever it was we did when we first started chatting 4 years ago. Got a little bit of real estate to cover, but maybe just first off, just things that stand out to you as we approach the 3-year anniversary of the regulated gaming marketplace in Ontario.
I think, still lots to celebrate about this market. The fact that from launch to now, it has only gotten stronger and stronger and better and better. And that's a testament to the fine people that work at both the AGCO and iGaming Ontario, and also to Doug Downey and his team, who's been such a champion of this industry. And so happy to see him reelected. And I think it's been also an amazing feat to behold all the operators that remain in the market. Now, I will just kind of also highlight the fact that we did have news a week or two ago that an early operator is leaving, and certainly cited, whatever you want to refer to it as, the red tape, the complexity, the compliance, the costs, kind of all of that coming together, making it, for some operators a rather hard or difficult environment to be profitable in. So this is something you and I have talked about off and on, and I think that this is just something we'll see playing out as the years come. It's like anything, people come in and try things, and if it's not for them, off they go, and then others come in and think they can do a better job. And so that's really, I think, what Ontario is going to be. We'll probably level out. My estimation is it'll be under 50 operators. Will be kind of our somewhere between 40 and 50 will be where we'll level out. And I think part of what the challenge will be going forward for the industry is just, after quarters, that have been increasing the revenue and increasing the return to the province, what does the picture look like when you're not seeing such drastic increases, and you're more seeing a leveling off of everything that's happening, including the revenue that's being generated. So, where do we manage, and how do we manage that going forward? Because that's not a bad news story. That is what is to be expected. And, making sure that we still continue to see good things happening in this market, even if things are starting to level off a bit.
If you go back to the days where we did this show on Clubhouse, I'm surprised I actually remember that, Amanda. We talked about consolidation, and that especially in year one, we would see the small fish get swallowed up by the bigger fish. That hasn't happened, and I just wonder if you have a theory on why that's been the case.
I think, to use the analogy of ducks paddling underwater, you see a lot of stillness above the water, and underneath there's a lot of feet that are furiously paddling back and forth trying to stay afloat. I think that is the case for some of the smaller operators. And I just think we haven't seen, again, my suspicious being that a lot of the small operators are gray market operators in the rest of Canada, and they're using that revenue because, of course, if you're gray in any other province, you're collecting all that revenue for yourself. So my suspicion is that they're using that revenue to sustain operations here in Ontario. And happy to be proven wrong if that's the case, but I just think with the number of operators in this market, and with the biggest American and the biggest European operators in the market here, I think it's going to be very difficult for every operator to be profitable. So I do think it's a matter of time that, especially once, we're hearing some news about the legislation, the package that Minister Nally presented in Alberta was accepted. So Alberta is continuing to kind of move forward slowly. There'll be more coming out in the next couple of weeks and months. So I think too, as another market opens, and there'll be regulatory costs that go along with being a licensed operator in that market, I think that's going to, I think that will be more of a telling time for some of these smaller operators than the current conditions.
You talk to almost everybody that has some kind of skin in the game in the Canadian gambling industry, Amanda. I just wonder, in terms of Ontario, are there one or two common themes in those conversations that you've had with operators and suppliers and regulators, whether it's at conferences or Canadian Gaming Association Zoom calls or any other kind of correspondence over the past 3 years?
I think the first is the fact that Ontario has been deemed a success from the day it launched, and it continues to prove that quarter after quarter. And I think the second, on the operator side of you, they just got through a really gruesome FinTrack audit that was not much fun for anyone. And it's well known that on the IGO side, they still have what is referred to as MVP, minimally viable product. That means they're not automating any of their reporting right now for a lot of the important data that they need to provide. So I think operators are just a little frustrated that we're about to ring the bell on the 3rd-year anniversary, and that's really still the case. It really heightens the risk of human error when you're forcing people to do things manually. We haven't seen, market share data come out of IGO. You can kind of connect the dots to if, you're still not automating the reporting functions. It could be that there's operator data that they can't fully trust. And so it would be nice if there was, an expedited way to start automating things, both for the operators and for iGaming Ontario. So the data could be trusted. There could be more useful data that gets released about the market. So I think that's, the direction. I know I read the comments that Paul was talking about in your newsletter, but it's part and parcel with it's been 3 years now. So it's, we need to really start addressing some of these things that, when we were talking about the 1st-year anniversary, and acknowledging speed to market became really important, because if we waited around to make everything perfect, we would never open. So it was really important to get the market open. Nobody disagreed with that. But 3 years in, especially with some really heavy reporting functions that operators have, they're really looking for some relief from the manual side of that.
You mentioned the newsletter. We're recording this interview on March 12th, and in the newsletter this morning, we reported on the current status of IGO replacing Martha Otten as the head of the organization, and that seems to be in some state of limbo right now. Martha is leaving the post at the end of March. That hasn't changed. She did agree to I think a 3-month extension back in either late November or December, Amanda. I just wonder that would seem to be, as this market begins year 4, how much of a challenge or what challenges does it present for IGO to not have a successor in place?
It's a great question. It's something that's certainly coming up more and more in conversation right now. I think people are aware that the election and what's happening with Trump and the tariffs is a really massive distraction right now for our government, and rightly so. And that has slightly delayed things. But I think, if I was an operator, I'd be waiting to see what news comes out of IGO with some information about who will be in charge in the interim while they're searching for the replacement. It could still take several months. If the government's only coming back mid-April, we still need that legislation to be enabled. And then the interview process has to move forward again. So yeah, we're just waiting to see what will be communicating with operators in the industry about who's going to be kind of minding the store while Martha takes a second attempt at a very well-deserved retirement.
We probably talked about this, man. I think Martha announced last August her plans to retire at the end of 2024, and I'm sure we discussed it back then. But is there a certain skill set, or I'm just wondering, like the new leader, and our understanding is that Martha's title was executive director. There's a movement afoot that this new leader would be a president, CEO. What is kind of the number one requirement, or what should they be looking for in terms of what this new leader is going to bring to the table?
Yeah, if I had to guess, it's someone who would be coming in maybe from the outside, who's had some operational experience and who can help reset the focus of the organization in a commercial direction. That's something that they've acknowledged that they need to really pay attention to now. The launch has happened, and we've had 3 years to see how things are running. And in discussions with operators, I did a small contract with IGO last year and reached out to my community of operators to get some feedback. And it was really, looking for someone who can help turn the organization into more of a commercial direction, so that, again, talking about reducing red tape, automating processes, really allowing operators to have a bit of an easier time achieving the compliance, not making the compliance easy, but allowing, automation to step in for some of the compliance functions, and allowing them to go out and do what they do best, which is, provide a entertainment product to, legal aged people in this market. And, everything that flows from that ladders back up to the province, in terms of revenue generation. So really, focusing more on how we can help operators be better at that without as much, I guess, as many encumbrances around them right now.
We've heard so many positive things about the market in Ontario over the past 3 years, Amanda, and we've also heard about the track record that the gaming industry has in this country around responsible gambling. I just have those attitudes changed at all, or we look at the U.S. where I think Ohio's come on board since the market opened in Ontario. In the U.S., operators continue to push to get more legalized iGaming across states. I think we're still kind of stuck at 6 or 7 states in the U.S. that have legal iGaming. Do people still hold Ontario in pretty high regard?
I think so. If you look at some of the comments coming out from some of the states, Ontario launched with, bans on inducements, and, the advertising had to be very restricted, and it got slightly more restricted with the changes they made for active athletes. And I think states are looking at that and realizing that when markets open like this, it means, operators are really competing on their product, their customer service, their platform, their content, things like that. It's not really about who can offer the biggest bonus. And it, in addition to leveling the playing field, it is a way of ensuring that there are some safeguards from, for the general public, when it comes to just even billboards on the side of the highway or commercials you may see on your phone or on television. And I think Ontario has really been lauded for that. I know operators were really resistant to it at market launch, but again, we're 3 years in. Proverbial sky has not fallen in. And I do think there are some states that are taking a look at that and, realizing that, it is not anything that is going to deter the success of a market by having those kinds of restrictions in place. But it's something, especially as we're talking to Alberta right now, it is part of, what we've positioned as the entire safety net that exists. And, thanks largely to the AGCO standards and how they were envisioned and written from the launch, that really considered, from the minute anyone would catch the first glimpse of an advertising campaign or marketing campaign to, they've opened an account and now they're trying to get access to tools to help manage time or money or to self-exclude. They really considered the full circuit of, start to finish for a customer's journey with an operator. And I think those safeguards are something that we're really proud of here in Ontario.
Final question. We've seen in Ontario that 50 operators plus the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation have been able to coexist quite well. I mean, we mentioned this to Troy Ross earlier. You look at, I think it's 3 annual reports I've covered at Gaming News Canada, and gaming revenues have risen on digital, I think, year over year. I think we've seen the same trend with the land-based casinos that the OLG manages. I just wonder, like, why aren't other provinces across the country taking a look at Ontario and thinking, hey, this is something that could work? Well, Alberta's on the path to regulation, but looking at Quebec, for example, looking at British Columbia, we'll just start with those 2 provinces.
Yeah, I think with BC, there's some early signs of thawing out there. Is the best way I can describe it. I know that there is going to be, hopefully some discussions, some meetings taking place, but I would say BC, if there's anything that's going to happen, that's going to be a very, very slow path to regulation. But again, it as I'm always reminding our listeners, it's a political decision that has to get made. And I think, not that anything happening with the tariff measures, gaming is not going to be the panacea to that. But if you're just looking at dealing with an existing issue in your province and just trying to capture the revenue that's, bleeding out of it, this would be what I would call low-hanging fruit for any province. Quebec, my province of my birth, have a great fondness for it, but they do pride themselves on being contrarian. And if Quebec ever gets around to this, it will be a made in Quebec solution. And I probably will be very retired by the time that happens. And that's fine. This is the beauty of, conduct and manage, and the provinces being downloaded, or the powers being downloaded to the provinces so many years ago. The provinces get to decide what happens within their borders. And, this is a perfect example of it. So I think, Alberta, when they launch, and especially if their standards are really aligned with Ontario's, it will strengthen the argument for more of a pan-Canadian approach to the regulations. It will get harder and harder to completely rewrite them, or, ask operators to adhere to a very different set of regulations, where some of the changes maybe is on the conduct and manage side, because again, every province interprets that a bit differently. But part of the efforts from the Canadian Gaming Association is trying to go into other provinces, trying to initiate the dialogue with all the appropriate stakeholders around the table, and then trying to find a model that will work for them. We hope it's largely like Ontario's, but every province will make that decision for themselves.
That's Amanda Brewer. Amanda, always grateful for your time. I don't know if we'll have the same conversation 6 years down the road, but we will wait and see for that. But thanks so much for coming back to the Gaming News Canada show.
My pleasure, Steve. Have a wonderful vacation, and I will see you when hopefully the tulips are poking through the snow or the dirt by then. No more snow.
Sounds good, Amanda. Thank you.
Take care.
That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show presented by GBG PLC. Thanks again to Amanda Brewer, Jared Beber, and Troy Ross for joining us. As always, you can find this podcast at gamingnewscanada.ca and also on the various podcast platforms. You can also watch it on the Gaming News Canada YouTube channel.